Knob gang, if you're with me, leave a comment down below to let VW know exactly how much they've got this wrong. It is so annoying. VW have been responsible for a number of iconic cars over the years. The Beetle in 1938, the Golf in 1974, and here we are in 2020 with yet another potential icon in the form of the VW ID3. Now, this car was delivered to me about 3 hours ago, so you're getting my honest first impressions about the ID3, and on the whole, I think it's a nice, cute, approachable looking car. I love the front end, really nice. It's about 20 millimeters shorter, 20 millimeters more narrow, and also 93 millimeters taller than a standard Golf, and also has a bigger wheelbase, which should in theory give you more interior space. We'll have a look at that in just a second. A few of the finer design highlights for me though include this glassy section by the A-pillar, which should allow you better visibility outside of the car. I love the fact it's got nice big wheels, 18 inches as standard. It can go as high as 20-inch wheels. These are 19s and they fill the arch really nicely. Along the side, nothing too complex. Not too sure about these stickers on the C-pillar, by the way, or the fact it's running old school drum brakes, but at the back end, it ties the whole thing together, and I think on the whole, this is actually a better looking car than the Golf.
As for practicality, the ID3 has a 385-litre boot, slightly more than you get in a Golf despite the batteries and the motor, though it's smaller than you get in a Model 3. In the back, there's good legroom and headroom. It's a practical space with a couple of USB ports, and there's no annoying lump in the middle of the floor like you get on some electric cars.
Up front, it's very similar to a Volkswagen Golf. You get the same infotainment screen, the same general layout, but because this is an electric car, it has a couple of key differences. First and foremost, you don't have a transmission tunnel, which means the center console is nice and low, and that gives it a nice airy feel. Speaking of the center console, you get a couple of cup holders, you get a nice area for storing a couple of mobile phones, which includes wireless charging, and also a nice big cubby hole in the center in which you can hide your bits and bobs. Plus this weird little nylon area that looks a bit like a woman's stocking. In terms of storage in the glove box, there's not an awful lot, but you do get a nice big storage area in both of the front doors. Now, steering wheel, I like it. It matches my jacket, but it also has capacitive buttons all over it which vibrate whenever you press them to confirm that you've selected an option. All of your instruments are located on this pod on top of the steering wheel, and whenever you adjust the steering wheel, the entire pod moves with it so that the screen is never obscured by the wheel. And also the drive selector is worth talking about too. It's a weird knob that you turn forward to go forward or backward to go into reverse, or you can press P to put it in park. Nice, simple layout. There are a couple of negative aspects, which I'll get into a bit later in the video, but for now, let's go for a drive. So, one of the questions you probably have about the ID3 is, what's it like to drive? And actually, it kind of reminds me of the original Volkswagen Beetle in some ways. So, it's rear-engined, the motor lives around the back, rear-wheel drive, and actually that's probably where the similarities end, because the ID3 is actually lovely. It's smooth, it's quiet, it's just nice in here. I'm gonna put something out there. You know, if you're looking for a normal family hatchback for pottering around to the shops, going to get a pint of milk, going to visit your nan, for example, then electric cars are better than petrol and diesel cars. There, I said it. And that's because they're just so lovely to drive. They're quiet. The suspension in this one is brilliant. It's just a more luxurious experience than you might get from an equivalent ICE-powered vehicle.
Most versions of the ID3 will use a 204 horsepower electric motor, while a less potent 150 horsepower version will also be available, though not yet in the UK. Most versions will do 0 to 62 in 7.3 seconds, and there's definitely enough poke there for overtaking or for hammering away from the lights. Again, not Tesla level, but for a family car, it's pretty impressive.
As for handling, well, it's not exactly a sports car, but there's not too much body roll through the corners, there's plenty of grip, and actually you can have fun in the ID3. This car definitely inspires confidence through the bends, mile after mile. But that brings me to my first negative point about the ID3, and that is the brakes. The brakes themselves are completely fine. They actually stop the car very well, and they feel very consistent. A lot of electric cars' brakes feel, well, frankly, awful really, but this one is actually pretty good. My gripe with the brakes is with the amount of brake regeneration. Essentially, there are two driving modes in this car. There's D mode and B mode, accessible via the drive selector switch up here by the steering wheel. In D mode, the normal mode, the car just kind of freewheels its way along the road. Obscene distances, really. You lift off the pedal and it just coasts for ages. It's almost like it never wants to stop. But in B mode, twist it forward again, and then you get a little bit more brake regen where the electric motor acts as a generator and sends power, electricity, back into the batteries. But it never actually gives you enough regen to stop the car to a complete standstill. What that means is you don't get any one pedal driving, and I know not everyone likes that, but you also don't get to adjust the amount of brake regen to your specific tastes. On a normal electric car, quite often you have paddles behind the steering wheel. You pull the left paddle to increase the amount of brake regen and pull the right paddle to reduce the amount of brake regen. But in this, you don't really have that option. You only have two specific modes.
In terms of range, there will be 3 battery options. VW launched the car with a mid-range 58 kWh battery pack, which will do around 260 miles. They'll also do a smaller 45 kWh pack, good for around 200 miles, and a larger 77 kWh pack offering 330 odd miles. The mid-range battery will take around 9 hours to recharge on a home connection, but if you're on the road and can find a 100 kilowatt rapid charger, you can go from 10% to 80% in 30 minutes.
Earlier, I promised you I'd talk about some of the things I don't like about the ID3, and let's do that now, shall we? First things first, the general quality of the materials in this car isn't that good. Okay, the upper level of the dashboard is reasonably nice, but everything below it is just a bit scratchy and doesn't feel like it belongs in a £30,000 car. Even the build quality, this screen seems to move around a fair bit, which isn't exactly reassuring. And this armrest doesn't exactly feel premium, does it? Even the material on the seats just feels a little bit subpar, if you ask me. And then there's the way that you interact with this car, which makes my blood boil. All right, this first started with the latest generation of the Golf 8, and they've continued it onto this ID3. They've gotten rid of all the knobs. Instead, what you get is capacitive buttons, which change things like the volume. And it's okay when it works, but a lot of the time, it doesn't work. If you come in from a wet day into the car and your hands are even the slightest bit damp, the temperature controls and the volume controls just don't work. It's just not good enough, in my opinion. The second thing I don't like is if you look at the doors, these window switches, there's only 2 of them for the front windows. If you want to wind down the rear windows, you have to press a button marked rear first and then push the button. And then if you want to adjust the fronts, you press rear again to adjust the fronts. And it's just unnecessary complication. In fact, I think it's VW trying to cut corners and save money on switches. Knob gang, if you're with me, leave a comment down below to let VW know exactly how much they've got this wrong. It is so annoying.
Prices for the mid-range ID3 start from around £32,000, but VW is trying to make it as accessible as possible. At the time of this review, the company's offering the ID3 for around £350 a month with a £2,000 initial rental with a 10,000 mile yearly limit, which is pretty aggressive pricing. That makes it very appealing, even if it's not quite the perfect package.
On the whole, I want to like the ID3. In fact, I do like it. I like a lot about this car. I love the way it looks on the outside. I think it's really cool. I like the way it looks on the inside. Not necessarily the build quality or the materials, but the general design is really cool. It's futuristic without being too up its own backside. But there are a few things that I definitely don't like. And one of those things is the user interface. I mean, the fact that it hasn't got a volume knob, the fact that sometimes the switches on the screen don't really work, and the fact that it doesn't have a rear window switch just kind of feels like a really cynical ploy to save money on VW's part. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't mind those issues, that can get their head around it and think, I'm going to embrace this car for what it is, then I think you're going to enjoy this thing.